Hey guys, today we're going to be installing an oil cooler on the 350Z. Before starting the job, you want to make sure you secure the rear wheels, put it in gear, and also apply the parking brake. And make sure you use good jack stands on the support rails to support the vehicle. I also use jack pads to make sure I don't damage anything underneath the vehicle as well. Today's video is going to be a durability mod. So putting on an oil cooler is going to help the oil stay at a cooler temperature. These VQ motors run very hot. Now by today's standards, it's not exactly a super high performance engine, but when you have a higher compression and you have to use higher revs to get power, you're going to generate a lot of heat. A lot of people are big on trying to delete the PCV system on these cars to reduce oil consumption. Now, there are a lot of reasons that will create oil consumption in an engine, but what if we can make sure that the oil runs a little bit cooler to make sure that we're not cooking the oil that these motors tend to do? On any water-cooled engine, water and coolant is used as a heat exchanger. Now, water is a very good heat exchanger, however, it has a very low boiling point. That's why we use coolant or antifreeze. It has a higher boiling point, but it's a very poor heat exchanger, so we have to run a mixture. In most cases, it's 50-50. So oil is a good heat exchanger as well. However, if the oil stays in the engine the entire time, it has nowhere to exchange the heat. That's where parts like this come in. So this is from Mishimoto, and it is their oil cooler. Now you can see it's actually a fairly large unit, and it will fit in the car really well. Now, this particular application that we're doing, I do have to modify it a bit. This is not going to be the exact same that most of you are going to do, because I have a snorkel down here to get cold air, so it's in my way. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing to make this whole thing fit. You don't have to follow this. There's actually a much easier way, and we'll go over that quickly. So for the Mishimoto install, it comes with this bracket which we are going to use, and it goes right here, and they use the factory holes, and then they want you to bolt up to the existing composite subframe. Very easy installation for the most part. However, because we have our intake duct over here, it's in our way, we can't use it. So what we have to do is we have to tap the bumper over here and mount it in here. So this is what I have to do to make everything fit. In a light accident, it should be okay. Like in any accident, though, if you crush this area, you're going to be damaging a lot of parts regardless. But I have to do what I have to make everything fit. So we can see down here from factory that Nissan is trying to cool the oil. So this is the radiator line, and they're trying to use coolant to pass through here to help exchange some heat to make it run cooler. It works kind of, it's simple, but there is a better way. So when it comes to performance cars, why doesn't every single performance car like our 350 over here come with an oil cooler from factory? Well, it's mainly down to cost and how complex it is. When you have an item like this in the front, if it leaks, we do have the potential of losing oil over time without us knowing. So whenever you install items like this, you do have to do regular checks on your vehicle, especially if you don't drive the vehicle all the time. And vehicles like this one has belly pan, so if it does leak, the belly pan's going to catch it and you're not going to see on the ground. So keep in mind, when you add items like this, you are adding more maintenance and more visual checks to your vehicle. For our installation, I'm going to have to mount the bracket up here into our bumper, as you can see. So there's just enough clearance that it's not going to rub up against here. This is for our airbag. I would not put it here if this was rubbing up against it, because this would make it kind of unhappy. I don't think it would set it off, but I wouldn't have anything rest up against this if I can help it. So keep in mind that this does vibrate itself. So originally the bracket goes down there. I do kind of like having it on the metal as opposed to the composite, because as the composite gets old, you have a little piece of equipment here stressing out a bit more. It could potentially crack. I'm not saying that they do, but it could potentially crack. Mounting to metal is a little bit nicer. There is a little bit of a disadvantage. Some of the fins will not be exposed, so we are going to reduce some of its ability to cool. This is a street-driven vehicle, not a big deal, but I don't want to compromise our cold air intake duct over here. So the way I have it here, I have it just over. I don't have it purely centered because I don't want to obstruct flow over to our other cooler over here. This is for the power steering. So we're kind of just like in the middle. So we're not going to disrupt flow to the stock stuff, and we're not going to disrupt flow over to this. And I do have my radar detector also mounted over here, so we want to be able to clear all the wiring for it as well. So this is what we are doing to attach it. So we have our 3 holes. Now we've pre-drilled the 3 holes using self-tapping screws. And I want to run it like this for now until I make sure that everything is where I want it to go before I go ahead and tap this, and then I use our new fasteners, which will be these guys. Now the disadvantage of this is the heads are bigger, so they take up more space. In this application, it won't matter. But over here, these are really flat. And these can actually hold a decent amount of weight. These ones are also zinc coated to prevent corrosion. And I'm going to use double-sided tape across the whole thing. This is going to do two things. Since we have metal on metal, it'll act like a bushing, so it'll eliminate any vibrating kind of resonating sound between the two pieces of material hitting each other. Two, this is used for automotive applications for moldings. This has a real, it's really strong stuff. So having this much surface area alone is probably going to carry the weight of the oil cooler. The oil cooler is really not that heavy. Even with some oil in it, it's not probably going to carry that much weight. But we want to make sure that is secured properly and strong to the car because we don't want it vibrating or falling off. So you will have to go through some double-sided tape. Now I had a little bit of double-sided tape on there when you saw earlier when it was actually attached to the vehicle because I had to place it in there and kind of figure out where the oil cooler would look good and be happy to clear everything. And then I also use obviously a measuring tape and a gauge here to help me line it up straight because we're doing this with the bumper shell on. I want to show you guys that you can do this with this on, but we have a lot less room. If you guys have the extra time and space, take off the bumper shell. You still will have to use a measuring tape and a gauge though to make this straight. Don't use a level because you don't know if the vehicle is on level ground and depending on the surface. So if you're using a level, it might be level on the level, but if the car is not level, it's not going to work. So just measure it. So if you guys are wondering how I'm tapping this without really getting super mad at it, you have to use a tool like this with those self-tappers and you get into tight spots. And the nice thing is this is aluminum, so it's super soft. If it was hardened steel, this would be very difficult to do. While doing this mod, we might as well change the oil. We have to take off the oil filter anyway, so we're going to kill two birds with one stone. So for our sandwich plate, we went ahead and upgraded to their thermostatic version. The reason being is this is a street-driven vehicle, and I want things to get to operating temperature as fast as possible. Now, if this was a race car and you're hot lapping it, and that's all this car does, you might want to just go with the regular version. That way it's always cooling. So the idea is that it will not flow oil through the cooler until we get to a certain temperature, and then once it's at operating temperature, it'll open up and cool it down. Getting to operating temperature is incredibly important because if you're not, that's where a lot of wear and tear actually happens, is when things aren't where they're supposed to be as far as temperature goes. You might notice here that I've taken out the plug because they use Teflon tape. I'm not the biggest fan of Teflon tape, especially when you started using this thread sealant. So I'm going to redo these two plugs over here and add thread sealant and remove the Teflon tape in there. Okay, now we're going to put our sandwich plate on. I want to make sure our mounting surface is clean. The old gasket is not on there. So you put your sandwich plate on. O-ring gasket onto the engine side, and then you go ahead and put your adapter. Okay, so we now have our adapter nut on with our sandwich plate. We just snugged it on. We don't want to over crank it, obviously, because we can damage things. So now we can go ahead and install our new oil filter, and we can run our lines, or you can do your lines first, then your oil filter, whatever's easier for you guys. Okay, change of plans. Putting the cooler the other way, having the fittings on top because of how long our lines are, and I also didn't like how low we were running everything. So these are the challenges we come across when we go out of spec on how things are supposed to go in. We have to make adjustments as we go along. Now that we have the cooler mocked up where we want, we're going to go ahead and pull off the bumper clip. I was trying to do this without pulling this off. It could be done, but if you're trying to route the lines really nice and up high, it's really best you take the shell off. So we just have to take a flathead screwdriver, and then you can lift these tabs up. And then pull them right out. On the sides here by the headlight, if you pull back the fender liner, there's no screws over here. You just take a pry tool and pry it back. You'll find two 10mm. Go ahead and take those out, and the top part of the bumper shell is loose. Underneath the car, you'll have to remove these 10mm bolts all along the perimeter. So you guys can see with the shell off, we obviously have a lot more room. So here is my cooler, and we have mocked the lines how we want to run it. And I kept running into a barricade right here, like literally. Now, watching the Mishimoto video, okay, there's like, you can see here, there's like access, there's wire here, and you come through. My problem is I want this to look factory, and my problem is they don't mention about modifying this, because this piece over here is actually flush. I don't want to remove it. It's hard to remove unless you pull off the cover because of this. I don't want to cut this out. And the other thing is this protects a lot of electronics I have in here. If you guys watch previous videos, I have those switchback LEDs in here, and I have a module in here, so I don't want any moisture to go in there at all. I want to kind of try to keep this intact. So mainly the top area is what I'm after. Now there's another piece that goes over here. We will have to modify this area over here for the for our lines to pass through, and then put this guy back. So this part will be left intact, and then we're gonna have to modify here so hopefully I can maintain a reasonable seal for moisture. So we're gonna have to take a tool. I checked behind here, there's nothing here. This is the composite material. So we can just trim this out, pass our lines through, and we're gonna tuck up everything really nice and high. Okay, so how am I going to give this the factory look? So we look over here, there are existing cooling lines, and they run through this composite subframe that holds the radiator and everything. So this isn't for everyone. I'm taking my hole saw and I'm making a hole right here, because what I don't like is everyone runs through here, you have to modify here, and there are electronics including the module for my switchback system. So I'm going to make a hole through here so I can leave this intact. It's not for everyone, like I've said before, but for the way I want it to look and have it laid out and get everything up high, this is pretty much the only way for me to go. Now, I find the trick with running for making holes in composite or any kind of plastic is I actually run my hole saws in reverse. The material will just allows my hole saw just to basically burn through by friction. Less likely it's to catch and crack anything because I'm just melting my way through. Once I've scored the material, I then run the drill in clockwise. That way the teeth can drill through. So I'll get a nice clean cut. Take your time here because there's something behind here. You don't want to hit it. You just want to remove that plastic. Okay, so we've made our cut. Nice and clean. Big opening there. We still have a lot of meat on here, so it's going to maintain its strength. So we will have to trim this out. But I'd rather trim this area out than trim this. That's just my preference, and then we can have a nice clean shot all the way back. We got all our lines hooked up and tightened. We just ran everything, double check, make sure that we're not having any hard bends, nothing's pinching. And before we start, obviously we want to put in our motor oil as well. To get more of our factory look, we are cutting this shield, and I'm using my little air rotary tool. Unfortunately, I couldn't show myself using it because I really needed two hands. So we were starting to rough cut it, as you can see, and then we can file it down. But this just gives us a general idea if we can get everything to fit. So I'm trying to line up with this hole over here to there, and it's almost there. So I'm going to have to put a slight curve in here. I'm going to maintain this flange. I want to maintain this flange to create a seal over here. But we're gonna keep notching just a little bit over here till we get everything to fit. I now have our shroud put in place. You can see so aside from notching it, we added some loom in here, and what the loom does is it increases the surface area and it's a little more rounded. Even though this is plastic at the end of the day and this is stainless steel braided, this is going to win, but I'm going to add layers of protection. So to remove any kind of sharp edges, just putting a little bit of loom on there, it's cheap and easy, and that'll help prevent chafing. Also, this never moving will prevent chafing as well, but there can be some vibrations and it might want to slide side to side, so we want to prevent that. So that's why we're securing it over here. And the thing about lines like this, unlike electrical wiring, because we have fluid passing through here, we can't take any hard, sharp bends. So I had to kind of mimic what factory did to see if I was doing okay, because I am really going what Mishimoto doesn't like. They don't demonstrate how to do this. So I'm basically basing on how the power steering over here is working. So it comes up aggressively. It's also going vertical and up. So if that can go vertical, why can't this come vertical up and over? It has to go up through here anyways. So but we're trying to make nice big long gradual turns. That way it can flow really easy, because if we were to like make an aggressive 90 and kink here, we're going to restrict oil flow, and that's not good. So we can see here, unlike the other demonstration videos where they pass through here, I have a lot of electronics and I don't have a lot of room through here, so I opted not to go this way, but you totally could. That's why I went with this hole, and it tucks everything up really nice and high. So my lowest point is still, technically it's the sway bar and the subframe over here and my still and oil pan. So you see my still and oil pan comes quite low. I am going to build a skid plate over here. I'm going to have someone design one for me based on an aftermarket point. So by going up here, we keep it really high, and the lowest point is the sandwich plate, which I'm more comfortable with. The other way I had it was I had it down here, kind of running along this factory wiring, and then coming low underneath the subframe. For a track car, I would say that'd be okay, because if you somehow had to service it and you had to remove the lines a lot quicker, that'd be better. But for a touring car that, you know, goes on like the ferry, goes on, you know, roads that aren't traveled that often, having it up higher, I'm a lot more comfortable with. So we just sprayed this quickly black because I nicked up some of the lines over here. I don't want that to corrode, and we can still fit on all our factory pieces. So we're going to put on some more of the factory pieces, and I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. I also like having these fittings up here because you don't hit this with elements. So down here, technically, they would just keep getting hit with moisture as it rains. And if I can keep fittings like this out of the elements, all the better. They are designed to be hit with them, but if you can avoid it, why not? So as far as longevity, I think it's going to last longer just having them up here tucked away behind the bumper shell. A couple things I want you guys to see while we're down here, how we came up through the rad support. You can see there's my loom. So it's tucked up away from everything. Now when I first bought this car, you can see there's a bunch of damage under here. And instead of replacing the bumper rad, this is the main reason why I put this front lip on. This is why it's the size it is to cover up all the damage. And you see here I had to make a makeshift shield. I am going to replace this, but like years ago I needed to put something here, and then the belly pan goes on top of this. But I wanted to stop water from splashing up. But you can see the previous owner, whoever it was, like rode up on something. Like stuff happens, right? Like I'm not going to say like I'm a perfect driver. Things do happen. Obstacles are on the road. But you can see how high it went. So over here, nothing got damaged, but it is possible you could ride up on something this high. This car, even if it's at stock height, isn't that high off the ground. So by having everything tucked up way up high, I am less worried about some sort of debris or something damaging the underside of the vehicle and hitting this. Because this is the lifeblood of the engine. So by having everything tucked up, if you're hitting anything at this height or even this height, you have bigger problems. That's why I'm going to develop a skid plate over here. That way, in case I do ride up on something, you never know, I can still drive home. Like, yes, underneath the car is going to be significantly damaged. I hope that never happens, but we have to prepare for the worst. So you see we have everything this way. Now I decided to have it at a 45 mainly because I wanted some room over here for my hand, so when I'm loosening up this filter I have an access point. If I had it straight, I would find it really hard to take out the oil filter, because typically what I do is sometimes I cheat and I just loosen up the belly pan over here and I pull it down and I drain everything and I grab it from here. So if I had these lines straight, I wouldn't be able to access it that well. So for how I service the vehicle, putting it this way seems to work really well. And you can see here, like, this is how I think, like, if a dealership were to install this piece, this is kind of how it would be run and how it would look. We're now just doing our test, and the cooling fans just turned on, and when the cooling fans are on, you can still feel air flow through here, and one side's starting to get a little bit warmer than the other. I'm assuming because it takes a while for oil to get quite warm, but even if you were to feel the lines, you can feel a little bit of vibration. Like here, it's attached to these lines. I painted over here just because I just wanted it to blend more. And off the power steering, it feels different. If you were to grab onto here, this has the same pulsation. It's kind of hard to tell, like, unless you had a leak, like, oh, is it working or not? So the main thing we're looking for is, are there any leaks happening up here? And obviously down here, we're looking to see if there's any leaks. Everything's looking good, but we wanted to get it warm because of that thermostatic plate. We wanted to get warm enough that it actually opens up and starts flowing through. You know, you fire it up for 10 seconds, like, okay, everything's good. No, if you only had the standard plate, you could assume that, but we have to let it get nice and warm, let it open up, and let everything keep flowing. So right now we're looking pretty good. We can go ahead and button up and take this thing out for a test drive. Okay, so we have our last piece of shroud, and you can see everything tucks behind nicely. So as water and if you were to hit hard rain, it just gets caught by this. It doesn't go back there to my electronics. That's what I'm most concerned about. I'm not concerned about these lines getting hit with water over time. It is stainless steel, but you see how nicely everything tucks in there, so everything's blending. So over here, everything, like, I'm not trying to hide anything here. It just runs the way it does. I notice a lot of people like to use zap straps or zip ties. We still use them over here on places like here, but where we have factory fittings over here, you know, you can just go buy a pack of clamps, but make sure that you get the insulated type. So this is stainless steel, and there's a rubber insulator. That way it won't chafe over time, and it gives us a good grip. So we clamped it over here, clamped it over here. It also gives it more of a factory look. Like, if you were to look at this, it's possible this could have came from factory. It's not like, it doesn't look hokey at all. Now, yes, typically I like to make things symmetrical. There's a couple of reasons why this isn't exactly in the center. Like, if you have any reason to put this in the center, like, now's a good time. I figure I wanted to get as close over to here as I could. There is an air temperature sensor over here, so air can still flow through it. It might be a little bit less accurate now because I put this in front of it. We'll see over time. I wanted these fittings to be able to be easily seen through the access port here and easy to get at. Also over here, it's hard to see on camera, this bumper starts to curve. So I wanted to be on as flat of a surface as possible. So I moved it over as far as I could till it started to curve, and then I stopped. That's actually the main reason why it stops over here. With the bumper cover back on, I don't see it being a huge big deal because everything looks pretty OEM in here. If I really want to, I could start spraying things black and make it blend more, not a big deal. But you can see, like, a lot of the car in here isn't symmetrical. Like, this is like not exactly symmetrical either. It's off to the right. Our intake tube over here is just like tucked over here, so it kind of makes sense the way it is. But now you can see this guy made this install be the way it is. Because there's no way I could use the Mishimoto bracket in its intended location and not hit this or not cut tabs off. So I'm not unhappy that I had to do this extra work. At least it shows you guys, like, if you have some sort of intake track over here, like a cone or whatever, you know, you still can mount this kind of wherever you want. Just, you have to mount it to the bumper. And some people say, like, well, you know, you can't mount to that. Well, if you were in any type of accident where you're crushing this big aluminum piece, you're gonna have other problems anyways. In a light impact, you know, the styrofoam's going to absorb a bit. You know, 5 kilometer impact, you're not going to hurt this guy. These cars, newer cars in general, like, they don't really take hits that great anyways, so I see no problem putting it over here. We still have lots of clearance. There's almost a finger gap over here, so we can still access things. We can see the horns. We're not obstructing anything from a serviceability aspect. We can still, if we had to unbolt this, we can. So that's the main thing. We wanted this to look like it came with the car, and we also always want to maintain serviceability. You can see my plugs for my switchback LEDs. Everything is easy still to get at. My radar detector, I can still plug it in. So in case I ever have to do any other kind of work, this guy's not in my way. You know, you'll eventually forget that's there. It's just another radiator basically. So yeah, everything's coming together really nicely, so now all we have to do is put the bumper shell back on. So what are the pros and cons of the oil cooler? Well, obviously the pros are that we're going to increase the service life of the oil. We actually increase the capacity as well by about half a liter. So with that big oil pan and this, you know, we're up at 1.5 liters over factory capacity. So that's nice because it's going to dissipate heat better. It's going to withhold all the contaminants much longer. So I don't extend my service intervals, but you could if you wanted to. The downside would be on a situation like this where I have the fittings up top, when we shut off the vehicle and we were to drain the oil, it will stay in here. Now, with the loop up here, it would still stay in there, so that would be one con I would say to it. Now, if you were to have the fittings on the bottom, it's better for draining the oil, but the downside to that is when you shut down the vehicle and you wait too long, you might have an inaccurate reading on your dipstick. So especially over time when you're just topping off the oil, you know, if you have a little bit of oil consumption, a lot of vehicles do, it's a natural thing. It's going to be hard to tell how much you're actually supposed to be putting in here. Or with it draining out, you might be like, oh, it's always full, but when it actually circulates and then you have oil in here, you're actually getting a false reading and the engine might be a little bit low. So these are extra little things that we have to keep in mind. This situation I think is going to work better for me because I change the oil so often, and I'd rather have a more accurate reading. And honestly, this is only installed for the reason of fitment, making these pre-cut lines work and everything. And for the look, this is just the best way for me to make this work. I probably, in a different application, I probably would have it upside down. It really just depends on how you're using the vehicle and how it's going to fit. And there you guys have it, very discreet. Now, some people might argue that because I have to run a front license plate where I live, you are not getting total airflow over to this to this radiator, basically. Yes, you're not, but these vehicles were designed to not have it. If you think about all the G35s, the 350Zs out there, they don't have these from factory. So the fact that we're removing the oil, running it through this radiator, putting it back in is going to make a world of a difference. If it was over here, yes, it would make it a little bit more. It would make it a little more effective. That'd probably be more for a track vehicle. As you guys can see here, like I said before, there's a reason why, because it starts to curve over here. I want it as a flat surface as possible. And like I said with the lines, they kind of just run the way that they do because it has to be a little bit organic, because you can't make aggressive bends like you can wiring. So would you guys put a mod like this in your vehicle? I think it's going to make a big difference in terms of durability and helping keeping my oil stabilized at a certain temperature, because these motors just get so hot for how much you have to rev them up to get power out of them and how much compression is going on. Just the nature of these engines and the way that they're built, they just get hot. And I think this is going to help it out a lot. If you like today's content, make sure to check out my channel and hit the subscribe button, and make sure to hit that bell notification. What that does is it makes sure that you're always kept up to date with all the content that we're providing with you guys on YouTube. So the way that we have the channel set up is I have the uploads up top. That way at all times you can always see, if you just hop by the channel, what our latest upload is. Plus with the bell notification, you're going to get some sort of message from YouTube itself. We also have popular uploads, car videos, how-to videos, demonstration and informational videos, and a lot of cool other specific car videos like our builds playlist. I really like the builds playlist because it takes all the theories from our how-to section and it keeps applying it to different vehicles. Yeah.